David, we're going live now, mate.
Right.
Morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Coffee, Buses and Politics. We've got a very special guest this morning, somebody who I've called Cambridgeshire's, no, not you, David, Cambridgeshire's foremost political commentator. And I think that's a fair description. Wouldn't you agree, gentlemen? And that's Phil Rodgers. Phil, can you just tell us a bit about yourself, and how you got involved in being Cambridgeshire's top political commentator, if that's a title you accept?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but I certainly do enjoy doing various bits of media, and these days I've got the column in the Cambridge Independent, and I do bits on Cambridge 105 Radio, and lots and lots of stuff on Twitter over the years. So I kind of first got involved in politics. I mean, I'd always been sort of fairly interested in what's going on, but I remember sitting in my flat in Cambridge in 1994, and a Lib Dem party political broadcast came on, and sounded quite sensible to me. So I said, yes, I'll sign up and join the Lib Dems. And then kind of nothing very much happened for a year or so. And then a little while after that, a gentleman with a long beard and sandals came round and asked if I'd deliver some leaflets. And even longer than yours, Martin. So I sort of did that for a while, and then I gradually got more and more sucked into getting involved in election campaigning. And then by about 2001, I was the agent. So that's kind of the person who's legally responsible for running the election campaign for the parliamentary candidate and for the council candidates. And that was kind of all good fun. And election campaigns have a sort of certain rhythm to them, and that was very exciting. Then my kids came along, and I took a bit of a back step after that, and later on parted ways with the Lib Dems. But I've always been very interested in what's going on locally and what's going on nationally, so I sort of follow what's happening in Cambridge politics. So here I am, basically.
So there's been a lot of disenchantment, hasn't there, recently in politics, and people disengaging, I think. But in this general election, maybe that's true of all general elections, things really seem to have flared up. So I went to my first hustings last night, and with Anthony Brown was there, and Ian Solomon, who'd contested the South Cambs election previously when there was only 3 candidates. This year we have 7 candidates on the roster or on the ballot paper, and we had a packed out hall. People really enthusiastic and interested about politics again. Do you think that the general election is going to cause an upturn? Well, obviously it will, but is there more interest than perhaps in the previous election, would you say, or is it about the same?
Well, certainly we've got more candidates standing this time, and quite a sort of broader range of them. And I was at a hustings in Cambridge earlier in the week, and that was packed out too. So I do think there's a lot of interest. Hopefully turnout will be up a bit. It sort of wobbles around 60-70% maybe. And that's quite a bit more than local elections, but nevertheless, not perhaps as high as it could be. And there's certainly a lot of debate going on, but really kind of one of the main characteristics of this election is everybody thinks they know what's going to happen. We've got this massive Labour lead in the polls, and the polls are more or less all going sideways. I mean, there's a bit of up and down, and Reform nibbling at the Tories' heels and so on. But kind of everybody is expecting a Labour government, but we will just have to see what the voters give us.
I just want to check: is it the Tories? Is it Reform nibbling at the Tories' heels, or the other way around?
Well, they're kind of battling for second place at the moment, it seems, in some of the polls.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Nigel Farage was on that last night on the debate, wasn't he? It was. If anybody watched that debate last night, it was awful. But
Nigel Farage, was awful for whom? Nigel Farage was as awful, but for everybody.
No, in general, I think it was just there was nothing. There were bits of it that were coherent, but a lot of it was just lots of people trying to shout over each other, and it just this is one of the things. If there are people interested in politics and turning on to things like that, it'll turn them straight off again. That's the thing that bothers me, because political engagement is, to a certain degree, it's everything. And so when politicians misbehave like they were last night in that debate, it does nothing. And what's interesting to me, Phil, and this is something that I don't know if you've got a comment on, the level of interest might be up, but the number of don't knows apparently is way above the norm.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot of disenchantment and disengagement, and you kind of look at polls of, how much do you like politicians? And the answer has always been not very much. But it's even so, there's been a definite downward trend over the last 20 years, I would say. And you kind of wonder what happens when that trend hits the bottom of the graph, and nobody likes any politicians anymore, and what happens then? So that's kind of a worrying trend.
Yeah, no, I agree, it's I think it's probably not worth dwelling on too much this week because we've done it to death in the past. But there is this thing about, from my perspective, that politics is broke, and it was covered last night. Actually, for the first time, we had, I think, an honest debate about and a few honest comments about PR last night, which was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a big enthusiast for PR, but it's kind of quite difficult because, parties, when they're at 5 and 10% in the polls, they think, oh, PR would be a fantastic idea. But when they sort of get near power, you think, actually, I quite like having all the power on 38% of the vote. So maybe we can put PR on the back burner for a while.
Yeah. So what's your views on Cambridgeshire, Phil, and where it's going to go? Have you got any sort of anywhere where you think there might be shops?
Phil made a prediction that I was going to lose my deposit, which
well,
was it?
I would revise that a little bit, but probably somewhere a bit above the deposit range is what I'm thinking now. But I'd have to know a lot more about what's happening.
Much as I love and admire Stephen, I'm with you actually, Phil, and that I think that's where it's at.
I think the perspective that you guys don't have, though, is that you don't see inside St Neots, and the big wild card thing is that we've got this. The part of the constituency used to be South Cambs, which is obviously a Lib Dem Conservative marginal, but 40% of the constituency is St Neots and my county council division. Yeah, and in that area, I'm by far the most well-known politician, perhaps, egotistically being one of the best known people in the area. And so I have got quite a lot of fervent support in my local area. And it's a big ask, but if I can get St Neots out to vote, I think I'll poll very, very well. And that was kind of the feeling last night at the hustings. All right, it was a hometown hustings, and lots of my supporters were in the audience, but I got some really good feedback. So I'm confident that I will easily get my deposit back, and I think I'm going to be a player in the results. But I would say that anyway. But sorry, Phil, I interrupted you. It was about me. Give us an overview of the Cambridge seats as you see them.
Okay, so Cambridge itself, I think, everybody is expecting Labour to win quite comfortably. There's routine campaigning going on, and, Labour and Lib Dems out knocking on doors, poster boards going up, all that sort of thing. But in practice, Daniel Zeichen's back in pretty comfortably. South Cambridgeshire, I think, obviously that's the Lib Dems' #1 target. They're sort of really focusing their efforts there, and various projections and MRP polls and so forth are suggesting they're doing pretty well there. And I think nationally it's in the top 5 most likely Lib Dem gains. So that's probably going to go Lib Dem, I think. Then at the other end of the county, Peterborough is looking very much like a Labour gain at the moment. So, it was only a fairly small majority, less than 3,000 last time. And just given the national swing since then, that's very likely to go to Labour. Steve Barclay, North East Cambridgeshire, he's the safest Conservative, and I think he's probably going to hang on all right up there. And then we've kind of got some really interesting contests apart from those. So Huntingdon and Northwest Cambs, where Alex is standing in Huntingdon, she's in with a real chance, and that's a pretty extraordinary thing to be saying. You go back to Labour's 1997 landslide, and even then John Major had an 18,000 Conservative majority in Huntingdon, but this time it does look like it's going to be fairly close. I would expect the Tories to hang on to both of those, but frankly, who knows at this stage? So they're sort of fairly unpredictable. And then where else we got? Ely and East Cambs, again, that's probably going to be Lib Dem or Conservatives, but Elizabeth McWilliams won't thank me for saying so. But there we are. And then St Neots and Mid Cambridgeshire, I think, is the least predictable of them all. if you put a gun to my, I do Cambridge 105 radio regularly, and Trevor Dan, who organises it, has banned me from saying we'll have to wait and see, because I used to say we'll have to wait and see quite a lot. He allows me one per programme. So if you put a gun to my head, I think probably Anthony Brown is going to hang on, but Labour are pretty strong, the Lib Dems are pretty strong. You're the wild card factor, Stephen. So who knows? Could be an interesting one.
And we had an excellent performance last night from the Green candidate, who I think is Catherine Fisher, who I think there was a vote afterwards on who made the best, who was the best, who had the best performance at hustings, and she finished first and I finished second, and yeah, she was quite exceptional. So there's always the Green vote as well to mix. So it could be a 3, 4, 5-way split, and when that happens, it's very difficult to predict, isn't it?
I mean, I know that I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think perhaps the ultimate winner is going to depend on what the sort of smaller parties voters do. I'm thinking, if a lot of people vote Green, that instead of voting Lib Dem or Labour, say, that might let Anthony Brown in. Similarly, in Huntingdon, if lots of people vote Reform, they'll take votes away for the Conservatives. If lots of people vote Lib Dem and Green, that takes votes away from Labour and so on. So is tactical voting or not tactical voting an artifact of our electoral system?
But
yeah, I mean, it's the Reform on the other side as well is going to have a huge impact. And I did some predictions for my work, and I actually pretty much came out exactly the same as you, Phil. The only thing I put on a bit of a proviso with my clients was it's dependent on the Conservatives running a competent campaign, and I'm starting to change my mind a little bit, because I think the Conservative campaign has been absolutely awful. It just and the campaign as a whole, I find really frustrating. I find this whole tax triple lock thing, I just think is utterly dishonest, and I hate it. But I find the whole, the whole focus around that tax triple lock and the way the media focus on it all the time, as well as being everything, I think is utterly dishonest. It makes politics dishonest afterwards as well.
It does feel a little bit, the triple lock or quadruple lock or triple lock plus feels a bit like razor blades. Now with 7 blades, every time there's extra blades. It's, a triple tax lock now with a lubricating strip.
Yeah,
and it's difficult for younger people who will be working to much later. The state pension always seemed like a Ponzi scheme to me, because the age keeps going up and up and up, and there's going to be young people starting work today who are not going to be able to retire into their 70s possibly, and I think that's quite a difficult story, isn't it? It reads well to the Conservatives' core demographic, which is older voters, but for young people, it's going to slaughter them, surely.
Yeah, well, I think it's more than that as well. Because of the fiscal drag thing, younger people are paying more as a percentage of tax as well, because obviously they're tending to leave university and have a lower salary, and the closer, as that salary sort of moves and the fiscal drag doesn't, because of inflation, the proportion of tax they're paying is higher as well, and that makes it a bit false as well. And I think young people you need to sort of wake up to that, and the fact that the fiscal drag has an impact on them, because an honest political system has politicians playing around with national insurance and playing around with income tax, but keeps the fiscal drag honest and keeps it in line with inflation, or keeps the allowances in line with inflation, and that's what an honest system does. The dishonest system is just distorts all of that, and that's the bit I hate.
And it's all dishonest, isn't it? There's almost no honesty, and that's what frustrates me as well. So one of the things I noticed with the Conservatives keep talking about £2,000 extra taxes under Labour, and they came up with this kind of breakdown of how much each policy is going to cost you, which I realised was largely bullshit. But actually having that written down and saying that how much supporting Ukraine is going to cost you in your pay packet, those things would be quite useful, wouldn't they, if they were done honestly and accurately, so people knew where their money was going to, because that's quite often, people don't understand. Same at local politics as well. And when I tell people that HCC's council tax is only £160 a year, they start to realize that they get quite good value for money for lots of those things, and it would probably help them revise their voting opinions if they knew how much it was going to cost them in the future. But we don't do that. It's just a big empty bucket we put our money in, and we don't really get any idea on how it's spent, apart from the little graph you get on the back of your tax return once a year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you do get this graph with your tax return, which is kind of slightly interesting. But all these promises on tax anyway are, they are painting themselves into a corner to a little extent. But you don't know what's going to happen over a 5-year parliament. It's very difficult to tell which way the economy is going to go, what they're going to need to do. And I think people will have largely forgotten the detail of the arguments about tax at the previous election when they're sort of 3, 4, 5 years down the road.
So going back to polling again, how accurate would you say that the constituency level polling is at the moment? Is it going to get more accurate, or is it accurate at all? Because it's tell us about that, Phil.
Yeah, so what's happening at the moment is we're getting these so-called MRP polls, multi-level stratification with, I can't remember, but basically what they do is they take a pretty decent sized, tens of thousands of people sample across the country, and they look at it demographically. So they say, okay, young people are doing this, women are doing that, older middle class people are doing this, and then they try and apply that to each constituency, sort of looking at the demographic factors. So Cambridge, quite a lot of young people, okay, we'll sort of weight the young people a bit more, and so on. And that gives you a projection for each constituency. But really, there's pretty wide levels of uncertainty with that. They do differ quite a good deal from one MRP poll to the next. So we've had, and obviously parties will pick the one that looks best for them. So in South Cambridgeshire, for example, we've had some that say, okay, the Lib Dems are absolutely streets ahead and are going to get a massive majority, and others that say, oh, it's quite nip and tuck and it's a three horse race. And probably the truth is sort of between the two. But on the whole, I really wouldn't put too much store by particular polls. And even when you get a poll that just focuses on one constituency, that isn't always right either. We've had some in Cambridge when there's been particularly interesting contests here, and they just turned out to be 10-15% off the final result. So it gives you a general indication. It's sort of broad brushstrokes, but and while I enjoy making graphs out of it, I wouldn't read too much into the numbers.
It does make it very difficult, though, standing as an independent or a smaller party candidate, because clearly I'm not going to be represented in the MRP polls because I don't have any kind of national profile, and I'm not. Those are based on demographics, as you say. But even when you do get people ringing up and doing polling, we've heard that they don't, at the moment, they're not listing my name as one of the candidates, and so it's very easy for political parties to put out their social media saying only we can win here when not all the candidates are counted. So I think that the whole thing about polling during election and tactical voting, which before I was a candidate I was always in favour of and something I always did, makes it very, very difficult to have an impact when there's no clear picture and perhaps the polls aren't as accurate as they might be. Do you think the polling accuracy will it increase during the campaign? Will there be more kind of proper constituency level polls, or is that something that doesn't happen, or don't you know?
You might get constituency level polls in one or two particularly interesting places, like Islington North, for example, springs to mind, and that's another place where obviously Jeremy Corbyn's standing as an independent, and it's a bit different to what normally happens. And actually, when we get past nominations, then people doing constituency polls do tend to prompt with the whole ballot paper, because that's what you're going to get on polling day, and everybody is listed. It's not like sort of turnover for the minor candidates or anything. So they will start prompting, but typically I think most of the polling is still going to be sort of nationwide and projected down to individual constituencies. I'm not sure. Maybe some local St Neots organisation would do a St Neots poll, but maybe not. I don't know.
So at the hustings last night, which is obviously a very biased audience, there was a poll, and Marianne Masters came in first, and I came in a close second. But of course, there are rumours circulating this morning that that poll was somehow rigged and that the voting QR code was shared outside of the room. So I think that's going to be a breaking story this morning. But yeah, it's difficult to get that, and it does make it very, very hard. And yeah, I think in some countries they don't have polling, do they? I think in France they don't have polling, or they don't release polling data during the second half of the campaign. And I think that might help. But I probably wouldn't have said that before I was a candidate.
I double checked this because I said this last week.
Oh, and that's why I heard it.
I was right. Yeah, that's why you heard it. Yeah, you heard it from me. So don't believe 1 minute of it. But no, it's I double checked it. And in the last week of campaigning in France, they don't have polls published, and I'm a big fan of that because I think I want people to vote for something they want, and the idea of going into the last week or the last day and making a judgment based on the last opinion poll and who you don't want, which is a lot of what's happening this time. I just don't think it's helpful. I don't think it's good for politics. The whole negative campaigning thing, which Penny Mordaunt was all over last night, and was dreadful. I just dislike. I want politicians to set out a positive campaign and start to show some leadership. And the last week of a campaign, that's what they should be doing, and people should be voting based on that vision. And if you kept the polls out of it, it would help that to happen. Have you got a view on that, Phil?
Well, I mean, personally, my approach to voting is I never vote tactically. You've got one vote. There probably won't be a majority of one. So voting is a civic duty, and vote for the party you like the best is always my policy. But I know that it does absolutely influence how things go. But as far as negative campaigning goes, politicians do it because it works. Unfortunately, if sweetness and light and harmony and fraternal debate was going to win your votes, they'd do that. But slagging off the other guy is an effective strategy, so unfortunately. So that's why it happened.
I mean, a certain amount. Even me, standing as a local candidate in a by-election, at the moment in Finland, I'm doing a bit of negative campaigning. Talking to people about the fact that they deserve better from the council. Is negative campaigning, and no two ways about that. But alongside that, what I'm showing people is I've got ideas for the area, and that's the bit, and the ideas and the thought. So it's a bit of both. And when it becomes all about the negativity, which is certainly where the Conservative campaign is now, it does nothing to help the reputation of politics. Is my view.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. Sorry, David.
Just on the tactical voting thing, I'm not sure I agree. You say you're only one vote. Things are unlikely. You're unlikely to win by one vote. I mean, it very occasionally does happen. I think there's a sort of categorical imperative thing here that would something be moral if everybody behaved the same way as you? And it's I don't know, maybe that's being a bit harsh, but I think it's a bit difficult because I've often voted tactically, and it's unfortunately because of the system we've got that sometimes actually does feel like the right thing to do. I mean, I guess there are some constituencies where it's so obvious who the winner is going to be, and they're going to be piling up votes in wheelbarrows. Then but. I'm not sure I agree. I think sometimes, unfortunately, tactical voting is the way to go.
In terms of winning by one vote, it's not at a national level, but at Cambridgeshire County Council, I won by 9 votes. Michael Atkins in Hardwick won by 4 votes, and that was 13 votes decided 2 of the 3 seats, which kicked the Conservatives out of the county council control. And so it does come down to that sometimes, doesn't it?
It's not unknown for council seats to be won on the flip of a coin. That's happened a few times. The first time I stood for town council, which was 1999, so I'm old, but I won by 2 votes, albeit 2 votes on a 12% turnout.
But you can count those 2 votes in so many different ways. Like the number of people who claim responsibility for being one of my 9 votes, because they all count, don't they? And that's really important. So yeah.
No, absolutely. I can see why people vote tactically, and I understand it. And I could, in northeast Cambridgeshire, Steve Barclay is always going to win. I don't think there's. I think I have seen one poll where he might lose, but the reality is, what you want to do is give him a shock if you're not a Conservative or not going to vote for the Conservative Party. It's a different thing, by the way. And the best way of doing that is by piling in on one candidate and voting for one candidate. And actually, in some seats, not so much in this one. What you might do is where, if you vote tactically enough, what you might do is narrow the majority enough so that in the next election it becomes a target seat, and that's where it gets interesting, because you get a load of national resource thrown into your seat.
Yeah, that's how Paddy Ashdown did it in Yeovil, didn't he? He did it in multiple bites, and so you get second on the first aim is to be second or third on the ballot paper, prove your credibility, and then go in. Yeah, because that's just the thing that's always going to be leveled against me is you're an independent, you're going to lose your deposit. Yeah, so somehow I have to demonstrate my worth. You don't do that by not sitting. So we'll find out for sure, won't we, on July the 5th, whether I'm a credible candidate or not. So
the Lib Dems used to do a thing which I used to tell the Conservatives they should do, but obviously the Conservatives don't think long term enough, but they used to do a thing where they'd take an 8-year view on a seat. I don't know if they still do that sort of stuff, but the idea behind it is, to have a local constituency organizer and set them targets and set them sort of an 8-year goal, where the 8-year goal, could be that they have such an impact on the area, and they grow the vote, and eventually, they give the guy that's achieved all that a shot at the parliamentary seat.
Can I sort of slightly hijack things? And I'd be interested to know, ask Phil, what effect? I mean, hustings are great, and they're lots of fun, and I think it's important that they happen. Do you think the hustings make any difference?
I've got to say, no, they don't. I mean, I think they're an important part of the democratic process, and I think the chance to ask the candidates questions and see what they say and hold them to what they said later is very important. But a lot of people who go along to hustings are basically partisans of one side or another. They're not going to have their minds changed on the day. A few people will, but on the whole, you'll probably gaining a handful of votes one way or the other at a hustings. And compared to going out and knocking on doors and delivering leaflets and talking to people, it's not going to have a very big effect. So I'd have to say not very much.
And do you think that can change if they're live streamed? Because now, you're getting more hustings now that are live streamed. And I'm thinking particularly you can clip them if there's a particularly good part, or I suppose particularly bad part. Do you think that will have more of an impact, or is that still people who are going to be watching that already know how they're going to be voting?
I think probably the main impact that will cut through is if somebody says something really unexpected or controversial that sort of gets media legs and other candidates seize on. That can have an effect, but the actual Home's audience is probably the most politically engaged 0.3% of the constituency. And if you live stream it, you might expand that to the most politically engaged 2% of the constituency. But again, those people already have a pretty good idea of how they're going to vote, and they're quite difficult to move one way or the other. A lot of elections are actually about turnout as much as persuading people one way or the other, because particularly locals, but also generals to some extent, you want to sort of get your people motivated to come out and support you, and you want to discourage the other lot. And if you can persuade a few to change their minds, well, that's a bonus. But a lot of it is all about turnout.
Yeah. Do you think that's why the Conservatives have sort of changed tack a little bit recently? Where within the last week, we've seen this sort of a switch, although they won't admit to it, where they've gone away from "we can win this" to "don't let Labour win this by too many." And is that about motivating the vote, do you think?
Well, I think they've always been doing that to a fair extent. My impression from the first week, and actually when the Conservatives were probably managing to do what they wanted to do to a reasonable extent, was it was very much a core vote strategy. Things like national service and tax cuts for pensioners and so on. That's really aimed at the very core Conservative vote. That's not trying to reach out to the wider electorate. And it's quite a defensive approach, and it's basically saying we know we're going to lose, but we don't want to lose by too much. It's sort of shore up the ramparts.
I just want to say, from a personal perspective, I'm nearly 60. I joined the army at 16. As a lad, you would have thought, it's absolutely targeted at me. I hated both of them, so but I'm probably unusual.
Yeah, I mean they're effectively sentencing every 18-year-old to 200 hours unpaid work minimum. That's not going to win a lot of youth vote, I don't think.
What we're going to do is treat 18-year-olds how we treat low-level criminals.
Yeah. But nevertheless, with certain sectors, the policy does poll pretty well.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, but it's been a long time since we had national service.
There's a comment from Dan Lentel, who was a Lib Dem and is now an independent, and says hustings matter for smaller parties and independents. I think that the point is, especially with all the recording, you can certainly destroy your campaign, can't you, by saying something inappropriate at hustings. And that was what I was feeling last night. It's just you have to somehow censor yourself. Not that you're liable to say bad things, but using a wrong word or saying the wrong thing. I've already seen lots of my views, which I think were quite reasonable last night, being misinterpreted all across social media. So there is an amplification effect that we're getting this time round that perhaps we didn't have last time round as well. So I think perhaps they have a bit more influence than they used to be. And when we get to the live stream ones, hopefully that will have more influence still.
I also think there's a thing about what it means for the candidates, for those guys from small parties, and in particular the independents. I think they matter anyway, because it gives them a chance to get and have a voice with the other candidates and the other people around them. And I think those people, because of the way they're motivated, I think that matters to them as well.
It's also nice to sit in the green room with the other candidates, because you spend most of the campaign isolated from them, don't you? And sometimes things inevitably get a bit tetchy between candidates, but to sit with them in the green room and sit and have a chat with Anthony Brown and Ian Solon and Mariana and Catherine was actually really quite nice. And I think that's a bit of an antidote to all the negative campaigning, is when you have to sit next to somebody and face them before and afterwards. I think maybe that helps temper some of the bad behavior, although not entirely, because obviously things got a little bit feisty last night, as it always will do.
I always used to value that time, because I used to, as a councillor, when I was leader and stuff, the time when you were in meetings that weren't recorded or that weren't minuted, sorry, not they're all minuted, but that weren't public meetings and things like that. I felt you got a lot more honest debate, and it was a thing that I used to, and whatever happens, whether they're formally organised by officers and and not public meetings, or whether they're informal meetings between candidates, those sort of meetings are always going to happen. And there was a Lib Dem drive actually to make all meetings public, and we can't do this and blah. And I used to think, well, those are the meetings where you really get into the meat of things and have good debate, because you've not worrying about who's watching. And you've not got an audience to play to. And I used to really like that. So I can see the point of that, Stephen. I really can.
Yeah, I think at County Council, the level of useful debate is inversely proportional to the number of people watching. So as soon as you get to the kind of the closed group and the working groups, it's fantastic and everybody collaborates. As soon as you get to full council, when people think they're in Westminster and everybody's watching, when in fact we've got an audience of about 25 mostly, people behave much worse. Talking about audience, we're up to 313, which is the highest we've had since Alex took a sabbatical. So thank you to Phil for bringing in all his Twitter followers.
There's a quick one here from Jason from Let's Go Skate. More live streams for hustings would be good, and I think this is why we do get viewers at this strange hour of the morning. People, you can put this on in the background while you're making your toast. Phil, can I ask another question? Because obviously you're Mr. Cambridge politics. Or Cambridgeshire politics. What role do you think, like local? I'm going to go. I don't know if you like being called a journalist or not, but local commentators, local journalists. What role do you think you have? I'm particularly thinking, as we know, traditional local media is declining, has declined. I mean, do you see a role for people like you or Anthony Carpenter in filling that in?
Certainly to some extent, yes. I mean, I just basically started off doing what I do for my own interest, and I kind of saw myself as mainly, my audience was mainly, local activists, and probably about 200 people who are sort of quite heavily involved in what's going on. But it's certainly spread wider than that. Now I'm doing the newspaper and things like that, and I do get people contacting me saying, help, I want to vote against this candidate in this constituency. What do you think? And I say, well, I can't advise you how to vote, but look at all these factors and make up your own mind and stuff like that. So I'm not ever going to replace the sort of local media in any way, I don't think. Sometimes there are particular issues that I get involved in, but mostly it's around just trying to analyze what's going on and sort of post a graph or two about what I think is happening. So it's still for my own entertainment as much as anything. But obviously traditional media has been radically transformed by the internet, and we don't. You go back and look at old newspapers, and there's sort of detailed reports of council debates in them that you don't really get to the same extent anymore. Though we do have an excellent newspaper in Cambridge still, in the Cambridge Independent, I've got to say.
I just want to say, I know you have to say that, Phil, but I have to say, from a personal perspective, I do, with what I do professionally, I do media monitoring, and I do media monitoring for my clients at a local level. And that's basically across the east of England and East Midlands in different places. And Cambridge Independent, I think, is a great newspaper. I have to say, they've been quite hard on me in the past on some of the work I do professionally, but they are really good at what they do. But also, your presence in Cambridgeshire stands out as well, because there's no one like you in Hertfordshire. There's no one like you in Northamptonshire. And what it does for me is it gives me something to turn to that is got a bit of authority to it, rather than just the many Twitter spats and stuff that go on. It gives me something as a reference that my clients can have a bit of faith in as well. And that's been some of the stuff you did certainly earlier on around the I think there was one where you published something and then you came out with something different and said, actually, this is what happens when you take into account tactical voting. And it was that. I found it quite interesting, because that sort of commentary is interesting for me, and it helps me inform my clients as well.
Well, that's great to hear. I mean, I have on my Twitter profile, I thought it was interesting, which is kind of a bit of acknowledgement that some of this stuff is a bit on the geeky side, and I'm just sort of posting random stuff I come across because I think someone might find it interesting.
If you can't be geeky in Cambridge, where can you be geeky?
Well, absolutely.
It's a geeky place. So I think the other person that you mentioned, Martin, is Anthony Carpenter. Also does a great job, doesn't he? Especially with a historical aspect as well. He's he's fantastic. I've lost my mic. Sorry.
Sorry, you've lost your mic.
No, I've lost my headphones. No, I've got my mic. It's quite big. So Anthony does a great job, doesn't he, of giving us perspective and talking about the history of politics around here as well. And so certainly as a county councillor who's elected to Cambridgeshire County Council, didn't know a lot about Cambridge history and politics. He's been a valuable resource to me. So
yeah, Anthony does a tremendous job, I think, and I'm always impressed by the sheer volume and quality of stuff he produces. I've got a full-time day job, and sometimes it's a bit of a struggle to find time to post stuff. But I think Anthony does very well.
On the local press, maybe do you think that Cambridge Indie has done enough to highlight policy reversals? Does it talk about that level of political? I don't read it as much as I should. I've only recently subscribed to it because I haven't renewed interest on that end of the constituency now. But do they cover the debate level politics, or is it?
I don't know. Maybe somebody else should comment on this.
Sorry. I mean, if you want.
Right, we'll leave that one.
Yeah.
Dan Grief says we are lucky to have such talented political commentators, and I think that's also true.
Yeah. So you did you come on here deliberately to be flowered with compliments, Phil?
Well, it's always nice, but I am aware we haven't talked about buses very much so far.
Would you like to talk about buses? Have you got an opinion on buses?
I don't actually use buses a huge amount. Maybe that's a terrible thing to say on this podcast. But
so where do you live, Phil?
I'm shocked and appalled.
Yeah,
I can add something about buses if you want. So what's interesting where I am in Whittlesey, we've been crying out for a later bus service and a better bus service for a long time, and we're starting to. And I made this point on a blog post yesterday that for the first time in a generation, we're able to talk about expanding bus services because of the Mayor's bus precept, and what quite interesting is the local Conservatives here absolutely went against the bus precept, put leaflets through doors about it and all this stuff and whatever, and now they're campaigning for better bus services, interestingly campaigning for better bus services that are already on the way because of the bus precept. And I just found it, again, it's a good example of how politics works around here.
Well, we're going to have a very interesting campaign for the mayoralty, I think, next year, because are they really going to campaign on the basis of vote for us and we'll stop the mayoral precept and your bus will go away? But
there's not a hope they will do it. And the thing is, now the mayoral precept exists, I think it will become a thing that I think it will become a thing that politicians can use to a certain extent to influence and whoever the mayor is to actually grow and be able to deliver some stuff himself without going cap in hand to government. And being blunt about it, that's devolution. And we're all, I think, anybody that looks on the outside of politics at a local level and is involved at a local level thinks devolution is a must.
Do you have an opinion on the structure of local politics in Cambridgeshire? Because it is very, very complicated, isn't it? Even as somebody who served at 3 levels, I find it difficult to explain to people what the different levels do, differentiate between them. And I think people always talk about the council. Are you in favour of a reorganisation of local government in Cambridgeshire? Phil?
Sorry, you're asking me?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Well, as you possibly know, I'm a member of this thing called the CAMS Unitaries campaign, and we're very much interested in having a reorganisation of, the swirling complexity of what we have at the moment. We've got the county, we've got the districts, we've got the GCP, we've got the combined authority. We've now got Michael Gove, or whoever it is going to be. Well, certainly not Michael Gove anymore. Coming along with this Cambridge growth thing. There are just too many blobs on the diagram, and I think a single unitary authority for Cambridge would be a fantastic improvement on what we have now. I don't think it's not going to solve all the world's problems, but it's just going to make life so much simpler when people phone up the council and it's the right council to talk to about bins.
Was that Cambridge or Cambridgeshire?
Well, broadly, so if you look at Northamptonshire, something fairly similar happened. They had a county and I think 7 or 8 districts, and the county ran into some financial trouble, and they decided to have a big reorganisation. And in the case of Northamptonshire, they basically turned it into two unitaries, one at each end of the county. So possibly something like that could work in Cambridgeshire as well. I mean, obviously Peterborough is a unitary already and has been since '98. So you might have one around Cambridge, you might have one around with Peterborough in the north, or one for Peterborough and one for the rest of the county, or something like that. You'd have to work out what would work best. But
Go on.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment there is so much fragmentation and so much sort of duplication of stuff between different layers, and one bit of the organization, one bit of the local government fighting with another bit in various times, that it's such a mess.
My only thing about Cambridgeshire and the splitting of Cambridgeshire, and I do agree, and I think all local governments should resort to unitary, to be honest. And I wish again at a national level they'd bite the bullet on it, but also say they would never ever impose council tax controls again either, because that's again devolution. But my concern about Cambridgeshire is actually about Wisbech, which is that within Cambridgeshire as it is now, one of the things about Wisbech and the issues it faces, it sort of stands out. And if you move Wisbech into becoming part of a Peterborough unitary, which effectively is what you would do if you changed it, Wisbech would get lost. And I think that would be a shame. I mean, there's also an argument that we haven't made enough impact on the issues around Wisbech for a generation, basically. But that's my biggest concern, because there's a lot of people there that deserve focus, and a town that on a whole it needs this focus on connectivity and things like that, so that you can improve its lot. Sadly, as we are now, we're not making progress on it anyway. But the other thing that's worth saying is Northamptonshire has not been without its political differences since it moved to 2 unitaries. West Northants has had some quite serious issues actually in the last couple of months, which I'm not going to talk about here, but they've changed leaders as a result of it. But also they've got these overarching structures to look after children's services and adult social care, and some of them have been in special measures since as well. So it's not it's not a perfect solution, but the reality is there isn't a perfect solution. What you've got to go for is what's the least perfect, and my view is some sort of unitaries model is probably it.
It depends where you draw the line, so doesn't it? Speaking from St Neots, which is in a new constituency with big parts of South Cambs, I feel much more affinity with my constituency than I do with parts of the north of Huntingdonshire as well. So if it was like a north-south split, I'd be all in favour of it. If it was an east-west split, which put us in with Peterborough perhaps, then that's more difficult, because there's a vast discrepancy in culture between Peterborough doesn't feel like a very St Neots kind of place. It's a long way away and it's a city.
But there are also parts of Huntingdonshire that certainly look to Peterborough for their services. Places like Yaxley are a good example. Where so there's an argument to say you'd split Huntingdon in half, but where you split it, I'm not getting involved in that fight. I'll let Huntingdonshire councillors do it.
And I see Dan Grief in the comments saying, how big an area would you propose for the unitary? And from the point of view of our campaign, we're basically saying, well, you'd have to consult on all this. In terms of the numbers, you would probably have 2 or 3 unitaries for the whole of the Cambridgeshire plus Peterborough area, because there's sort of a target of about 300,000 people that you need for one of these things to be of a reasonable size, and the population is about 900,000 across the whole of Cambridgeshire, Peterborough. But it would be very much, I think, up to different places. Well, which area do you have more affinity with? Which area do you think would make more sense for you to be in?
So here's a thought. If we move towards a development corporation of some sort around Cambridge, would it make sense? Because I know one of the debates that's going on around the development corporation is about geography. I know that conversation is happening because my input to that has been that 150,000 homes plus the economic growth that is going to come along with it. If you want to make if you want to make that happen and make it beautiful, Cambridge and South Cambs on its own doesn't cut it. Is a reality. So I know there's a debate going on about the geography of. Is there a sense in saying, based on this horrendous series of blobs and overlaps that we've got at the moment, that you make that development corporation mirror the boundaries for a new unitary?
I think that would certainly make sense, but I've got to say, I think a lot of people are quite concerned about the prospect of a development corporation, and where is the democratic input and control for Cambridge to sort of have a say in its own future, because certainly with the current situation, or before the election, we've got Michael Gove basically coming up from London saying, right, we're going to take over, we're going to tell you where all this stuff's going to happen, and okay, we'll have a couple of you on our board to listen to, but essentially it's central government saying what's going to happen. And I think it's really important that there should be more democratic input and control for Cambridge to have more of a say about its own future.
I'm just going to cut in. I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to step away. I'm actually an hour ahead. I'm at a work event in Croatia. And I've just had a message from my boss saying we can't get the projector to work. So I'm going to have to disappear, which I'm really sorry about. Phil, thank you very much for coming on, and I'm sorry to abandon everybody. In case anybody's interested, my favourite bus at the moment is the number 2, which goes to the University of Zadar.
There you go. Can you take some photos next time you get on it, David, as well, and post them on social media?
Yeah, sure.
You still got to do it.
Yep.
So it's about time we're going to wrap up anyway. But let's go back to the general election. What are your predictions, Phil, for the national the outcome of the whole election? So in Westminster, who's going to win? Obviously, I think we know that's going to be, and what sort of majority are they going to get?
Well, you can buy next week's Cambridge Independent and find out. But broadly, I think I am expecting a Labour victory, but I'm not expecting the sort of complete Conservative meltdown and ginormous majorities that some of the polls are predicting. So I think it will be a Labour government, and they will have an outright majority, but it won't be sort of the complete sort of beyond landslide scenario that some of the polls are suggesting.
Do you got any predictions, Martin, to finish off with?
Yeah, I do think Labour are going to do very well. I think I do think at the end of the campaign the polls are going to close. I think there's this focus on the financial aspects of Labour's plans, and some of the wording around "we've no plans to do this," which are sort of those things come unstuck, and I do think that focus is going to close the gap a little bit. My big fear is that Reform are going to overtake the Conservative Party. I hope that one shock poll yesterday will actually see some potential Reform voters jump back to the Conservatives, because my view. I want the Conservative Party the Conservative Party needs to break in order to fix itself again. But I don't want it to break to such an extent that a party like Reform outgrow them.
All right. With that, thank you very much for coming on, Phil. Maybe you can come on again after the general election, and we can talk about the results, and I'll come on as the MP, not having lost my deposit. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for listening. See you later. Bye.